Obviously, the purpose of tonight is just to make sure that you as parents and your sons and daughters have all the information that you need going forward over the next few weeks. And the way we're going to structure it is in a few moments, I'm going to pass on to Mr. Davey, who, as you know, is the head of Upper Sixth, and he's going to have a sort of question and answer sort of evening, if you like, which will take about half an hour or so with Mr. Ross, who's our head of academic development, assistant head, and Mr. Davey will be asking the questions that you've kindly sent in. And I hope by the end of the evening, all the answers or concerns that you may have will be assuaged. So that's the way that we're going to structure it. I'm just going to pick off a couple of questions on the sort of bigger picture, I suppose, of why we're doing the process or conducting the process in the way that we've decided to do. Well, I think the overview, the main thing I'd like to say is that, of course, we wanted to design a structure that we follow which works in the best interests of our pupils, your sons and daughters. And that's what I believe we have done. Now, I know that other schools have done things slightly differently. In fact, there's a school I'm aware of who today have had their last day. That's it. They've done their assessments, they're off, and they won't be back until early August. That's not the way we felt we should do it at Reeds, and we didn't think that would be in the best interests of our pupils. So we're trying to manage that delicate balance between making sure that your sons and daughters are supported, that they don't feel too anxious, that they're not worrying too much about what's coming up, yet they're stimulated and motivated to produce work which allows us to have the evidence that we need to award them the grades that we believe they deserve. Now, this is a very strong year group. In fact, I would be so bold as to say it's the strongest year group that we've had at Reeds based on their GCSE results. So they should feel confident that they'll get, individually will get very good grades indeed. We have structured the process over the next few weeks in order to provide opportunities for your sons and daughters to show us the level that they can reach. And the more opportunities, then that has got to be a good thing for them. We've chunked it up, so they will have a few topics in a particular subject, and then they'll have an assessment on that, on those topics, and then we chunk up the next bit of the syllabus, etc. So hopefully, again, that plays to everybody's strengths. It keeps everybody calm, keeps everybody motivated, and everybody moving forward and seeing some progression. So we'll touch on a few of the things around that later on with the Q&A session. The other aspect, of course, is that, it is your sons and daughters' last year at Reeds. We don't want to say, OK, let's have a replica examination system where we cram everything in to a week or two and then say goodbye to everyone and off they go to do goodness knows what in lockdown, and we won't see them again until August. We've still got the co-curricular that's going on. That's a really important part of one's education. There's lots of activities that are still planned after half term, where the pupils will still be with us and in school. And in fact, just being in school, learning together, having that sort of collegiate community is really, really important, I think, for their well-being and also their academic progress. So I think on all levels, having a longer run-in to gather the evidence is going to be in the interests of your sons and daughters. And I know other schools are doing it differently, but they're not Reeds pupils, and we're doing what we believe is the best for our pupils, for your sons and your daughters. Last year, the schools did it differently for the CAGs. We did it a particular way, and I think we did it extremely well. And I've no doubt we'll do an excellent job this year as well. So please be with us. Fide is the school motto. Please have faith in the people that you'll listen to tonight and the staff. We are here to ensure that the best happens for your sons and daughters. That's our overriding priority. Of course it is. And hopefully, I know that parents would acknowledge that that's what we try and do at Reeds at all times. So I hope that's given you a little bit of an overview and covered some of the bigger questions, the sort of philosophy of why it's a slightly extended period compared to maybe other places. So now I'm going to pass over to Mr. Davey, who's going to be sort of like the sort of Graham Norton, if you like, but a better version, far more handsome. And he's going to pose questions to the equally handsome Mr. Ross, who will hopefully cover all the questions that have come in from parents over the last few days or so. So, Mr. Davey, over to you.
Thank you, Headmaster. I was thinking more Jeremy Paxman, actually, but I'll take Graham Norton. Thank you. So, good evening, parents. At this stage, we think it would be useful to have a Q&A with the school's Head of Academic Development, Mr. Ross, informed by questions that you have raised in respect of grades in recent weeks. Now, our sincere hope is that by doing so, we might confirm the arrangements, clarify the process, and address any concerns that you may have. Now, among other things, we will be considering how the grades for our upper sixth students will be determined, how the school will support students who may experience some disruption to their assessments, for example, through illness, the nature of the feedback students can anticipate receiving during the assessment period, and the appeals process. So it will be useful. So, first question, Mr. Ross, and this is, I think, probably one of the most important questions that parents will be interested in knowing is, how will each grade be determined?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? Good evening, Andy. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay, Andy? That's the first thing to double check. You can. That's awesome. Okay. Yeah, obviously that's the big question, and there is a short answer and a longer answer. The short answer is that as teachers of the school, we have to submit grades to the exam boards for each subject, each student, by the 18th of June. The exam board will then carry out some quality assurance on those grades that we've submitted, and will ask us to reconsider them if they don't think our evidence is strong enough, or will accept them, and the grades will be issued by the exam boards in August. But that's the short answer. The long answer obviously has several stages to go through, which we've started in the last week and a half, and we've still got a month to go on of that. In coming to that decision about what grade to put in on before the 18th of June, teachers will be considering a huge range of evidence, but the starting point for that evidence will be the results of the assessments that boys and girls, the sons and daughters, are carrying out, are undertaking this term. So we think that this term provides the best opportunity for the students to show the best of themselves, and we'll look at those results as the starting point. That fits in with what the guidance is from exam boards and from JCQ, who are saying that schools should pay particular emphasis to most recent evidence, to evidence that they can be highly confident of the authenticity of, and to evidence that was carried out under a known level of control. And in essence, that is, assessed conditions, as we're doing this summer. But we also know that there is lots of evidence held already on the attainment of the students, and we sought to share approximately the level of that evidence through the issuing of the current evidence grades about 10 days ago, which went home, and I know there's been some questions about the precise significance of those. In essence, we will use those where we need to contextualize this summer's results. In addition to those bits of evidence and the assessments that are going on at the moment, there will also be, for many departments, non-examined assessments, coursework in old phraseology, which has been completed or is being completed and is being marked and moderated by departments. And for some departments, that will make up quite a significant chunk of the grade as well. So there's a huge range. There's a huge range to go through. The final grade, once all of that evidence has been collected by the departments and the marks are in front of them, will be a qualitative judgment. It is a judgment of the grade that best fits all of the evidence that has been collected. It's not a formula or a weighted average or anything like that. Teachers will be asked to make a judgment based on their understanding of all of the evidence in front of them of what the right grade should be. And even then, that's not finished. Once those grades are provisionally proposed by the departments, the head teacher, the leadership team, yourselves as a sixth form leadership team will be reviewing those grades and scrutinising them, asking questions of them, looking at variations between departments, variations within departments, perhaps from previous years, and looking at some of the records that have been kept to show evidence of the process. So lots of work to do by us and by the students over the next month to get to the position to put those grades in.
Thanks, John. So given that we already have evidence, why is there so much emphasis being placed on the assessments this term?
Yeah, really good question. And I think this question also helps to contextualise the current evidence grades as well. And the absolute key to this is what JCQ have said to us about the idea of trajectory. What we're not able to do is to award any grades based on any assumptions that we might make that of a student, how a student could perform or would perform. And so in essence, what that means is that unless we already have evidence, and we think plenty of evidence, it's not clear how much evidence the exam boards are going to be looking for, they're quite vague on that, but unless we already have evidence of the target grade for each student, then this term is about generating those opportunities for students to show of that. And it's very normal throughout the course, as many of the students, the sons and daughters watching here this evening will know if they think about their GCSE experience. In a two-year course, it often comes together in this final term. And so you'd expect the best work to be produced in this final term. And therefore, it makes sense to give students the opportunity to show their best work now. And that really is what it's all about. It's trying to provide as much evidence as possible, or opportunities as possible for them to show their best evidence. So there's been a bit of discussion on that in the media. There was a blog on TES this week by the head at South Hampstead, who was defending exactly the same sort of approach from her school, sort of saying that it's really essentially a necessity for students to be given the opportunity and to have the agency over their final grade. If we didn't do that, then they might be stuck on grades that were not as good as they felt they could achieve or could have achieved if they'd taken the final A level. So really the emphasis on this term is about timing the evidence with the point at which they peak and are of their best.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree. Historically, it's this time of year when our students, their skills are sharpened, that they've learned the content, and they have that to shine in the exams. Certainly based on the past. So given what you've said, what past evidence of grade performance will the school use?
Yeah, good question. And we will publish that for each subject, and we hope to do that before half term. So students and parents will get a chance to see what that is. We're fortunate in the attainment policy that the school has anyway is based around awarding half-termly grades that relate to work set at a standard of the A level. And so what we think is that quite a lot of work that students will have done would be considered to be pretty good evidence if the exam board asked us to explain what it was. We wouldn't have to submit the exact piece of work, we would submit records of the work and explain to them what the task was. So we think there's lots to choose from. Exactly what we choose, we're just waiting and holding off absolutely finalising that, because we're waiting to see how the first series of assessments come in. It may obviously each assessment will be covering slightly different pieces, and we may select different historical work according to how the results of the assessments go. Essentially, we'll be trying to make sure that we've got the best possible evidence in the basket, as it were. But we'll publish that before half term. I mean, an obvious one will be the predicted grade exams. You know, that was the most formal one. But I think that's a good example of where many, you know, lots of students did really well in those back in September, but many have I know a target grade of doing at least one grade better than that. And so it's useful to have that predicted grade there from that performance, but many will be hoping to do better than that in the coming weeks.
Okay, thank you, John. So I think another question that's been raised is the issue of fairness. How will the school make sure that assessed work is fair between classes? We give the department often have many more than one, and of course, in many subjects, there's more than one class sitting these assessments.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a big challenge. I mean, the first thing is to make sure that all the marks are moderated. So whether that is a single teacher marking an assessment and having another teacher review that on a sample basis, or as we've done in geography, dividing it up by questions so that the same teacher marks all of the same ones, and then there's an element of moderation. So that will be done, and heads of departments have to sign off that that process has been undertaken, and other teachers within the department will have to do that as well. So quite a lot of pressure on the teachers there, and an awful lot of work going into the feedback from it. It's a very busy time for our colleagues in trying to not only set the questions but mark them to the standard that this very important task requires. So that's the first way. The second way has been logistically. We've made some adjustments to each weekly timetable to enable assessments to take place either at the same time or what we're calling kind of back-to-back, period 2, period 3 or something like that. And that's where there's the instances that you talk about where there's more than one set doing a subject, but they're not normally timetabled at the same time, to avoid any worries about some students sitting it first before another one. So some logistical work there done to try to make sure that there's a sort of level playing field in terms of the assessments. And then coming back to the scrutiny that the headmaster will put upon the grades when they come in, which will be to ask questions of the heads of departments about their process and to check that essentially all of those moderation procedures have been followed, and he will only sign those grades off when he's satisfied with each department's grades.
Okay, moving on, in terms of calculating a student's grade, do the grades of the whole class or even the whole cohort bearing on an individual student's grade calculation?
Yes, that's been something that's really come up a lot, hasn't it, in these first few days. The short answer is no, and the key to this is that this year's assessments, the grades are based on evidence. It's evidence-based. Rather, last year we were bound far more by everyone sort of heard the phrase the mutant algorithm, and we had to submit grades that were within a certain tolerance of the school's historical profile, which led to a really unfortunate position where students were sort of ranked against each other and there was a limitation to their success. The positive thing this year is that I mentioned that idea of student agency before, and that is really true, that if there is the evidence to put forward, say, more A stars than we've ever achieved before in geography, then that's what we will do. There's nothing, it's all about the quality of work that each student produces. What we will have to do as a centre is each grade submission has to be accompanied by a narrative that explains what they're calling significant variations compared to the grades of the 2017 to 2019 A-level cohort. But that's simply a practical matter. If that won't stop us putting the grades forward, we're very confident. The headmaster said in his introduction, we know how strong this year group are, we know how strong their GCSEs were, and we know how well we believe, all of us collectively believe they would have done had the exams gone ahead. So we'll have no problem putting forward support for strong grades. So in short, no student should be worrying that they know that one student did really, really well in a paper and maybe that's decreased their own chances. It's about what each student does.
So, in other words, if we have students who perhaps might be, if we have students who might be disappointed perhaps by a KEG result, the message is very much in. Okay, so another question, again, this is a frequent one. Why have the assessments so far contained questions that students may have seen before, for example, in past papers?
Yeah, that has come up a lot. Ofqual made the decision not to not to publish any new material for this year, not to try to keep things secure. I guess that was in the spirit of exams having been cancelled. What they did was they asked exam boards to publish what they're calling additional assessment materials, and those were published on exam board websites for students to be able to see. And that essentially what that means is that there really aren't any fresh questions for us to use. You know, by the time we reach the end of the course, we've got lots and lots of resources on Firefly, and lots of resources are available on the exam board websites that show the past questions. We could have tried to create bespoke papers and write our own papers, but that ran the risk of essentially, I suppose, creating assessments that didn't quite match the format, the style, the content that exam boards, which have, it takes a long time to produce an exam paper, they might not have been perfect, and the exam boards may have felt that they weren't such strong evidence if they weren't their own produced materials. The guidance states that exemplar materials provided by exam boards will be the strongest. In essence, then, we're left with past papers, practice papers, specimen papers, the vast majority of which students may well have seen before, and if they haven't, they're available for them to see on Firefly or on exam board websites. And actually, a very sensible revision policy is therefore to make sure that you are looking at past papers and considering the questions that have come up before. What teachers can't do is say, the assessment next week is the 2018 paper, for example. That would be malpractice, but we can't say which ones it would be, but essentially it's very likely to be an assortment of past questions.
So in other words, if a student is using past papers to inform their revision, then the likelihood is they're going to have some kind of contact with some of those questions. So it's something we would continue to encourage in departments. Will parents and students know the evidence that will be used in the grade?
Yeah. As I say, we will publish what we have to submit for each subject. They're calling it an assessment record. It's basically the basket of evidence. As I said, the majority of that starting point for those will be the assessments from this summer term. You can add in any NEA work, any coursework that's been completed, and then there will be a range of historical pieces of data. And those are being finalised as which ones those should be, and those assessment records, or a draft of those assessment records, will be published before half term for students to look at. But there shouldn't be any great surprises on there, in the sense that in terms of the emphasis for the vast majority of students and subjects, the emphasis will be on what has happened in recent weeks.
So, John, is it the case that the school can simply select the best pieces of evidence for a student?
Yeah, no, again, the short answer there is no. And there's been quite a lot of confusion, I think, around this from a change of emphasis from when the replacement to the examinations was initially being announced and being consulted on, to where the final guidance finished. And the key thing here is that the final JCQ guidance says that wherever possible within a subject, the evidence base should be consistent, and it would only be where there are some exceptional circumstances, which I think you've got some questions for me on in a bit, you mentioned, that we could do some sort of individual variation. In other words, select a different piece of work than has been used for the other group. And so that basically means that we have to make our professional judgment as to collectively for the cohort what is the best evidence, but we can't do that for an individual, and that is a slight that is bound by the guidance as it was finalised.
Okay, so I suppose another question is what happens if something goes wrong? Okay, and we've had some experience of that through the first week of assessments. For example, we've had students who unfortunately have been ill or injured. So first off, what happens if a student does not perform well under the pressure of assessment? Yeah,
I mean, I suppose that is the flip side of the coin around it being evidence-based, that to be able to give the grade that a student is hoping for, they will at some point need to provide us with evidence of attainment at that level. So without it sounding too blunt, they will need to find a way of mitigating that pressure and showing good work. Again, what we're hoping to do, and this comes back to the whole philosophy that the headmaster talked about at the start, by spreading out our assessments across a half term, putting them into lesson-sized chunks, trying to do it in an environment that's familiar, we're hoping to reduce that pressure. So the students that find traditional exams difficult, we hope that what they're doing now, excuse me, is it will be less pressurized than what they would have faced. And one of the things we hoped to achieve through publishing the current evidence grades was a reassurance that although we know that grade might not quite be the final grade that they're hoping for, there is plenty of evidence already. Whereas, of course, if you go into a normal A-level exam season, it's it's all or nothing on a couple of papers, and the pressure really is much higher. So, the main thing to say there is the great thing about them being around school is that, and I'm sure you would reinforce this, that they have access to their teachers, their tutors, yourself, Miss Rice, Mr. Michael, and all of the people who would usually support them to try to help them show of their best on that day.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons we're so keen to have students coming into school every day, because we're at that point now where lessons, in fact, are essentially clinics, where students have the opportunity to work on past papers and to have instant feedback from teachers to finesse their understanding of content and, of course, any technical issues. Yeah. Okay. Now then, in the event, perhaps for any number of reasons, a is able to sit designated assessment, what happens next? Okay, yeah, and we've had a few of those cases, haven't we? I mean, in short, if a student's absent, it doesn't need to be the end of the world. If for some reason they're ill, of course they shouldn't come in. If they're too ill to take the assessment, they shouldn't come in. First stage is to let Mr. Vernon know. He's the school's exams officer, and he's very experienced at sort of managing this kind of system. So there's then a number of options once we've got it recorded, and the final decision will perhaps take a few days to decide about. It may be that the simplest thing is to arrange for the assessment to be taken at a later date, probably using modified questions, but that doesn't need to happen immediately. We want to make sure that the student isn't felt, that they're put under lots of pressure to do it straight away, while they may have other assessments coming up. It may be that a department feels that for that student, actually, they've got some alternative evidence, historical evidence that they can use, which they think will provide just as good a basis, and the student doesn't need to retake it. So it might be that the head of department talks to the student and says, well, just concentrate on what else is to come, and we'll, let's think about that one missed one in the future. I mean, I think what I would say is it's less complicated if you can avoid absence. So going back to the point that these assessments are designed to provide an opportunity to show of your best, and we think that this is likely to be a chance to show your best. Sitting them at the same time as everyone else is the least complicated route, but of course if something happens and that can't happen, then we will there are a number of options, and the first thing to do is just communicate with the school as to the circumstances, and we will record it and take it forward from there. So students can take some comfort if, in the event that they are unable to sit an assessment, that there is evidence in the KED basket for them, if necessary, that they could possibly be referred to. Just to repeat that a student is unable to sit an assessment, they should contact or email Mr. Vernon, and please do copy in Mr. Michael, myself, or Miss Rice into that as well. So again, on a similar vein, Mr. Ross, if a student does sit an assessment, but perhaps for whatever reason they feel unwell, or indeed the assessment is disrupted for some reason, whether that is a fire alarm or some other issue, what is the process then? What is the procedure at that point? Yeah.
So if there is something where a student feels they weren't able to show the best of their ability for some kind of specific circumstance on the day of the assessment, then again, same principle, let Mr. Vernon know. Of course, as you said, copying all of you as a team in relevant. And again, to be honest, the principles then, to begin with, fall the same. There's always something called special consideration available within exams, but this year the JCQ have said that they don't expect schools and exam boards to use that in the usual way. And the reason for that is that there is this flexibility for the school in terms of the evidence that can be used. So the same thing, if someone was feeling terrible on the day, a migraine came on, they had to leave, halfway through, and essentially, that has clearly had an impact on their achievement for that assessment. We have the option to allow them to have another opportunity to do it, or to look at what we've got from them for the past. So it's the same kind of principle as the absence. If none of that works, if for some reason we think that none of that is appropriate, we can then, in the review phase, which I sort of talked about, the centralised review phase, have a look at what adjustments can be made to the scores, and for that, Mr. Vernon would be following the JCQ policy of how to deal with notified special circumstances. And to give you an example, the maximum uplift that a student could receive would be 5%, and that's very rare. That's for really serious tragedies, perhaps, that have affected the student within a very recent time period of the assessment. The most common category of adjustment is 2% for disruption of of multiple sorts that people might be facing. So it's not a huge amount. It may be an amount that's significant. Our first port of call will be to try to find an alternative way of generating the evidence. But again, to reiterate, as you did before, the first thing to do, if there's anything at all, as soon as possible, let Mr. Vernon know, copying all of you in, and leave it with us. We will then work out the action from there.
Okay, thank you very much. Perhaps we could turn to the issue of feedback now, and providing some opportunity for students to sort of gauge progress as we move through assessments. So I suppose the starting point is and students anticipate.
So we plan to distribute the marks via Firefly in the usual way for assessments, distributing marks via Firefly, so that students can see the raw mark that they got. We did, and we've done that already in a few subjects in the first couple of days of this week from things that were taken last week. We did actually ask teachers just to take a bit of a pause on that today. We had a bit of feedback where students who'd received marks were feeling a bit unsure as to what they meant, maybe a bit disappointed, and perhaps there was a question as to whether it was helpful or not for them to receive marks, perhaps while they're trying to prepare for the next one. So we've taken a pause. We've spent a long time this afternoon thinking about that and just sort of consulting as well with a number of pupils and teachers. We are going to continue giving out those marks. We do feel that on balance, for the majority, it's helpful and reassuring to know how they've done, to get a broad idea of how they've done. But what we will be emphasising to teachers and to the students is that, if there's any sort of level of disappointment, absolutely they should talk to their teacher, and it's our job doing all of the things that we hope that we aim to do so well in the school, to pick up a student who feels a bit disappointed and help them to have a strategy to move on and do better in the next one. So that's where we'll get the raw marks back via Firefly. In class, teachers will certainly in these early weeks spend a bit of time thinking about lessons to learn as a group for the future assessments. Obviously, as we move further through that will become less relevant, and that will be the feedback for now. So it will only be marks. What I would say, just be cautious as a student or as a parent in trying to interpret a raw mark to a particular grade. And we might talk. I think you're likely to ask me about grades in a minute. because we're doing things in bite-sized chunks, lesson-sized chunks, no one assessment that a student sits will map directly to a grade boundary for an entire paper, an entire subject. Those are available. You could certainly look those up on the exam board and get a sense of the rough grade boundaries, but no one section of a paper will necessarily map to that. So I would just urge caution in drawing too many conclusions about what a grade is from a mark, and remembering that idea as well, that different aspects of the course and what each assessment tests will need to be considered by the teachers in their final judgment about the overall standard of work. But I think, again, above all, if a student is worried, or if a parent is worried about a student's reaction to their mark, please just get in touch. Let the teacher know, the head of department know, one of you know, and we will do everything we can to pick them up from there.
So just to recap then, we anticipate, or students can anticipate, feedback from tomorrow, as per usual. And just to reiterate to parents, if you have any concerns about your son or daughter's reaction to any of those grades, then please do get in contact with the pastoral team, myself, Mr. Michael, or Miss Rice. Next question, John. Will students and parents know the final grade that pupils are awarded by the school? No.
In short, no. That's the one thing we're absolutely not allowed to do, is to disclose that grade. So there's a number of reasons for that. Mostly that, as I said at the start, the grade we submit may not be the final grade that is awarded by the exam board, depending on the outcomes of the external quality assurance. So the student won't ever know the grade that we have submitted in June, which is difficult. I suppose it mirrors a normal exam season where you have to wait till August the 10th to get the result, but there won't be grades. And again, because of that, and for the reasons that I mentioned before in talking about marks, we're not going to give out grades for individual pieces of work either, because they could be misleading. And what we desperately don't want to do is, in either direction, disappoint or lead a false sense of perhaps complacency to a student about one piece of work, because no one piece of work is so significant that it's likely to lead to the final grade. So we're not going to give out grades for individual pieces of work. We'll only give out the raw marks, and students cannot be told of the final grade that we submit. We'll all have to wait until August the 10th to find out what that is.
Thanks, John. So in the event that a student has received perhaps a disappointing mark, or what they suspect is a disappointing mark, what resit opportunities are there available to those students?
Yeah, really good question. This is a difficult one. The key principle of the guidance that we have to follow here is that of consistency between students for every given subject. So in essence, what happens for one student has to happen for all students, unless there is a specific reason to make an individual variation. And we touched on what those might be earlier, an absence or a particular issue with a particular piece of evidence or one assessment. So as such, it's not going to be possible to offer students a resit opportunity because, for example, because they felt it went badly or they ran out of time. That's not going to be possible. It's just about feasible that the department may offer an opportunity to all students. We won't. I think that's quite an extreme outcome, where they might feel that if an assessment perhaps didn't go very well for the whole cohort, that they want to offer another opportunity to all. I hope that won't be the case, because that will be very stressful, and I'm certainly not anticipating it, but it would be under those circumstances only. So unfortunately, it's not going to be a question of having another go. What I would say, again, coming back to the same principle about the holistic judgment, one anomalous piece of work isn't going to have an enormous impact on the grade. So and the simplest example would be if A stars have been achieved throughout the course and in 3 of the 4 assessments in a given subject, and a B was achieved in just 1 because it was one of those days, which we know happen in exams. to a large extent that B will be disregarded as anomalous and not important enough to consider.
I think that's a point really worth emphasising, isn't it? That students' overall result was not decided by one poor test. It's overall gathering of evidence really that's going to help inform that grade in the end. So moving on to the sort of, I guess, the having sat this, the students having been awarded their grades. Is there an appeal process? So if a student is unhappy with the assessment process, is there an appeal process they can refer to?
There is, yeah, there is, and in the information that was sent out with this invitation on Friday, the guide for students and parents about the awarding of grades, there's a flow chart in there that sort of sets out the options. Obviously, as a school, we are hoping that will be as minimal process as possible, because what we're hoping and fully expecting, as hopefully we've set out tonight, is that the vast majority of students will achieve grades that they're really, really pleased with and they fully deserve, because they will have done so well both in these coming weeks and in the past. So yeah, that's the first thing to say on it. The second thing would be that, again, if we keep this, what we're trying to do here this evening, I think, keep this idea of communication going and engaging and dealing with problems as they arise, that we can, because we have this flexibility that I've talked about, issues that arise, given assessments or particular student circumstances, we can do our best to manage and make sure that they're dealt with before any grades are submitted. So we're really, really hoping that all of the hard work that the students are putting in and all of the hard work that our colleagues are putting in, and there is an awful lot of hard work going in to this to try to create these opportunities and make them as fair as possible, will avoid the need for appeal. But essentially, yes, and there'll be more information coming out from JCQ about exactly how to do that, and we'll pass that information on with the results on August the 10th on that traditional results day.
Well, you basically answered my next question, is when will the final result be? So thank you very much for that. So I think that's all the questions from me. I think one thing have I mentioned appealing the final awarded grade?
Yeah, I mean, that would be that final, that would be something for us to talk about on August the 10th. If there was a sense of disappointment on August the 10th with the grade that was awarded, an appeal to the exam board, the first thing to do would be just to check, was there any kind of clerical error? Was there any kind, was the grade that we submitted the one we intended to? And of course, if it wasn't, we could rectify that very quickly. And then after that, if it becomes an appeal about the judgment that's been used, there will be various stages to go through. But as we said, we hope that will be really an exception, because we hope that students will be really pleased with their grades, and we hope that students and parents can see that the process that we're undertaking is rigorous, is robust, and is designed to create opportunity.
Okay, that's great. Mr. Ross, thank you very much for your time. That's fantastic, and loads of information there, and really helpful. So parents, I hope that your questions have been answered, or at least you have a clear idea on the process. You have a good idea of understanding how the grades will be determined, and importantly, in the event that something may go wrong, how the school will best support our students. I think probably useful just reiterating the bottom line there, that our students' destiny remains very much in their hands. So they have the agency, as Mr. Ross said, to go out and get some absolutely cracking results. So without further ado, I'll pass back now to the headmaster.
Thank you, Mr. Davey, and thank you, Mr. Ross, for this evening, and hopefully answering those questions, the questions that have come in from parents over the last few days. I think just the final thing for me to say is that if you do have any further queries, then I think particularly if it's on a pastoral side, obviously the people to be in touch with would be the tutor, but also Mr. Davey, Mr. Michael and Ms. Rice. And if it's more sort of process, a sort of technical question, I suppose, then please direct those queries to Mr. Atkins and to Mr. Ross. Either of those two will be able to help and provide an answer to any query that you may have. So I hope that that's given everyone a bit more information, confidence in the process and how things are going to carry on moving forward. Just anecdotally from pupils I've spoken to, and obviously they did their GCSEs 2 years ago here, the boys obviously, you know, I get the sense that the pupils are finding this a sustainable, supportive mechanism by which they can improve, and they can also provide that evidence that we need as a centre in order to award the grades that I know and they know, and you know, that they are capable of. So I think the first week has been, you know, very positive in that regard. So I've no reason to doubt that that will not continue as we move forward over the next few weeks. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you very much as ever for your support and for tuning in. And as I said, if there are any queries, direct those questions to the members of staff I mentioned. And I very much look forward to seeing you all very soon, either at some sporting event if that's permitted, but certainly it's Speech Day in July. Thank you and good evening.